Hello and welcome back to Story Glimpse. This is Season 1. Get ready! Today I'm going to start by telling you a story I wrote called Hell to the Chief. Let's get started. Hey there! Weston Kincade here, supernatural fantasy and horror author. I'm going to go ahead and get started with my story Hell to the Chief. Since the devil took his last breath of brimstone air, hell has been a bit more tragic than normal. People guilty of the most horrendous acts live corrupted lives in an underground civilization, not unlike the desert suburbs of the upland world. But it has become a civilization in chaos, a Darwinian bubble. Hell just isn't hell anymore. Where's the torture, the consequences? It isn't like Satan took off on holiday or simply abandoned his quest, for that would mean he'd adopted the role in the first place, not been thrust into the position as punishment. Who would have thought the damned angel would still lust for freedom after punishing and tormenting so many for millennia? All it took was for God to disappear. Some would call it a miracle, others disaster, but that's a tale for another day. My tale is far more entertaining. How do I know? Because I'm a politician. The mayor of hell. Mayor Theodore J. Smythe. Isn't that enough reason? No? Are you sure? Fine then. Because it started when I died. Isn't that a wonderful place to begin a story? And God can't die. Honestly, he's probably on a Neptunian beach sipping pina coladas under a lavender sky, green and tinted babes wandering around him in bikinis. He did take the seventh day to rest, mind you, and the golf outings with Jimmy Kimmel have probably worn thin. That would be like having shared custody of your toys and spending every other weekend playing with your dolls. Not the best story. Mine is far juicier. Ever wonder what happens to stunt doubles when they die mid-scene? Those shots aren't normally used, and you only hear about the stars. But what about us mid-listers and below? What happens to us? Let me tell you. The families receive a nondescript envelope containing a check for a moderate amount and an NDA to sign. For those outside the film industry, that's a non-disclosure agreement. The few in the know may mourn. It's sad, disappointing, and if we had any say post-mortem, it wouldn't be allowed to continue. But frankly, that's not in the spirit. The agencies own the business, to be honest. Fortune favored me. For that shaped my story. They say arriving at your destination starts with a bright light at the end of a tunnel. Maybe for some people, but not me. The tunnel looked more or less like a sewer shaft, rivets and all. And there was no light. The putrid water seeped into my black wingtips and socks, drenching the bottoms of my jeans. All I could sense were the joins in the tunnel walls and the lowering elevation. Soon the tunnel turned into an unlit water slide. I was slipping through the muck, powered jacket, smelling worse than a hobo's, until the final sluice slowed my speed. A large underground room paneled in rusting metal sheets was the first thing to overwhelm my vision. Old gas wall sconces pushed out from the walls, illuminating the room. Stunned, I lowered my feet from the sluice and squished onto the rock-paved floor. An enormous butler, who would have given Christopher Lloyd a run for his money as Fester Adams, stood towering above me. With a grunt, he pushed a simple black briefcase into my hand and motioned me forward. Uncertainty and fear seeped into my gut, but an enormous hand guided me out onto a cavernous balcony. Dirt streets lay below, haphazardly created by the tramping of feet, human and demon alike. They moved about as though energized, powered by something beyond the human condition, like the Energizer Bunny had been waylaid into stopping for a visit. Acting as hell's very own Santa Claus. The ruckus they made was nearly intolerable. Shouts, screams, and devastation, as though every child who'd ever discovered coal in their stocking had eventually made their way here. Buildings miles away beneath the crust of the earth crumbled to dust before my eyes, all of it lit by enormous geysers of molten lava. Streams of the glowing material followed the dirt roads and sometimes went through them. Human pedestrians should have been wary of every step, but instead they watched the world around them like morning earthworms after a rainstorm, alert so they don't become prey to circling predators. And from this vantage, I knew they were right to fear. Red-skinned, horny demons pounded through the streets, happy to prostrate the nearest human, no matter the gender, and excise the secrets of various cavities with curved horn, hand, or other protuberances. It was in this moment I realized there were no pearly gates in my forecast. This was to be my world. No angels singing, no happiness, nothing like I'd been used to as a stunt double. The carousing was over, unless I was unfortunate enough for one of the demons below to take a liking, but somehow I didn't think that would be the same. I stared out at the devastation and rioting. This is hell. Sensing the giant butler nearby, I voiced my question. He approached the ledge, standing beside me, and grunted. It seemed to pass for a vocal assent from this character. At least I was learning to interpret. How can this be hell? The large and silent type harumphed, then held up a flat hand and shook it side to side like a boat rocking. So, kind of hell then? He lowered his hand and grunted. I think I'll call you Fester. Sound all right to you? He considered for a moment, then shrugged his large shoulders. The dingy butler's coat seemed to lift the shoulders lift his shoulders of their own accord, as though something within wasn't fully connected to his torso. I didn't ask. Fester couldn't speak, and the last thing I wanted to see was whatever was hidden beneath that uniform. Staring around, my eyes widened when I saw a familiar face bent beneath one of the lustful demons below. Walter Cronkite? Really? Fester grunted, but a gravelly, childlike voice chimed in from the stone steps leading up on my right. Poor Walter, it said without emotion. A green clawed foot topped the landing, followed by a small goblin's body. They'll let anyone in nowadays. He looked like a cross between a gremlin and my sister's obese boyfriend, the one that always reeked of B.O. What do you mean? Well, Walter just came down to visit some friends. At least that's what he told me. Looks like he got more than he bargained for, the goblin chortled. I mean, really, who leaves heaven for hell on holiday? Come on! The tone of this creature's voice was something you'd expect to find sliding down a wall in a local dive. He was slimy, suspect, and far from authentic. My instincts told me as much. Not someone I can trust, I confided to myself. People like that were hard to find in life, and I realized that would likely be even more difficult now. The frustration I'd held dormant began to bubble over. However much I couldn't trust this guy, at least he could talk. That was more than I got from Fester. Why am I here? Is that part of this screwed up situation? I mean, hell, really? Really? The goblin put out a clawed, three-fingered hand. Stewpot, at your service. Hesitantly, I took it. Stewpot? He nodded. Yes, sirree. Why am I here? And what's with this? I raised the briefcase, which now appeared to be handcuffed to my wrist. I glared at it, stunned. Stewpot put a hand over mine and lowered the briefcase. Because there is always a plan. You. Fester grunted. What? What in the hell do you mean? Stewpot grinned, raised his eyebrows, and said, Exactly that. I stared, waiting for more. Sighing, Stewpot waddled closer. Look, things are changing quickly. God's on the outs, Satan went all carpe diem, and now there's no one to watch over hell. It's chaos, pure chaos. He waved a hand out over the view. Do you think it's always been like this? Parties and perversion 24/7? Without waiting for an answer, he continued. No, this was no pleasure cruise, and before long the humans will figure a way out. The only thing left down here will be demons and goblins. Trust me, you don't want to be around when the demons are out of playthings. Fine, then show me the way. I'll be the first out. Taking a step past Stewpot, I was surprised when neither stopped me from leaving. Instead, they both watched. It brought me up short. What? That's about the stupidest thing you could do. You don't even have lube. Even Satan granted Osama bin Laden the remnants of a tube before sending him out onto the streets each night. It dawned on me exactly how painful even a stroll through town could be. Those demons were searching for people just like me. Swallowing plan A, I reconsidered. Then where do I go? Stewpot shook his head. Not telling. That's not why you're here. Oh, really? What did I do to deserve this? I expected gleaming white gates, apostles, saints, and the like. Maybe even a glance at the old man himself. What did I do to be sent here? Stewpot held up a hand, fingers extended. A finger fell. 1. Who expects to go to heaven when they died juggling chainsaws while standing in the open doorway of a plane? In flight. Well, The goblin held up his other hand to forestall my answer. That's idiotic. He dropped a second finger. 2. You are the first to arrive from the upworld since the big guy left. Hence the briefcase. So what does that mean? I had been right before. Stewpot's explanation made no sense. It means you are here as upper management. You either accept the position or take your chances below. Fester grunted his assent, and I looked out over the cavernous landscape for once more. The screams of men and women echoed up to us. How long's the devil been gone? 2 weeks. 2 weeks? You mean to tell me no one's gone to hell in 2 weeks? They nodded, and Stewpot looked abashed. Bureaucracy, you know how it is with a transition in power. People end up in limbo, a few packages miss their designated drop-offs, and others slip through the cracks while admin sorts it all out. Things are working now, though. I can tell. Looks like you're doing a bang-up job, I replied, still staring at the savagery. How do you know who deserves what punishment, whether it's been administered more or less often than necessary and all that? Stewpot shrugged and held his hands up. That's for you to figure out. You're the candidate. Candidate? Candidate. Fester sounded out with confidence. It was the first thing I'd heard him say, which impressed me. But what did it mean? Yes, the first candidate for mayor of hell. Finally, it was starting to make sense. I never had political aspirations. I lived to be older, but I was barely 30 and loved my life. The drugs, booze, women, it was great. The first? Where's the second? Who is the second? Stewpot shrugged again. Not sure. There might not even be another candidate. Depends on if you can get the votes. Wait, the votes? You can't expect me to try and get the votes of the humans down there. I pointed. Stewpot grinned. Of course not. You have to get the demons. It made sense now, but that seemed even more impossible, especially if the first thing they were likely to do was impale me like a rabbit on a spit. And 3, the goblin continued. You played a president in your last film. No one liked. So of course you're the prime candidate for the job. Wait, 1 and 3 were the same gig. And you took the job. Welcome to hell, stupid. That was when I knew this would prove disastrous. But what other choice did I have? That was day 1 on the job. It was rough, and I must admit that the first few times we strode out onto the streets, I took a tube of lube. I'd love to say I never had to use it, to say I was able to convince the first demons I came across to vote for me. But no. Sadly, KY came to the rescue a few times at first. It was painful, shameful, and left me feeling like the doormat to hell, but each morning I woke in my bedroom pain-free. The shame was still there, the embarrassment and the memories, but there was nothing more I could do. Nothing but plod ahead with the role I had assumed. Fester and Stewpot truly took to the process when we convinced a few human scavengers to join us in the 2-story cave we called home. In exchange for safety, they became my campaign committee, and the committee grew to include a Seville Row tailor, printers, manufacturers, and salesmen. So many salesmen. With no used cars to sell, they gravitated toward me. Soon I took on the role of a professional, as did my staff. Attired in a black suit and tie, briefcase cuffed to my clean wrist, I looked like Humphrey Bogart with a presidential escort. Buttons were plastered across the staffers' coats, and were even pinned to Fester and Stewpot's new matching suits. Slogans as simple as "Vote Smythe" and "I'm with Smythe" were common, but the goblins Stewpot recruited to be our spies had other ideas. Soon mottos like "Don't be a Stewpot, vote Smythe" were circulating. It seemed counterintuitive to me, but the gobs took to them with pride. An especially favored one that gave me a chuckle turned out to be a pair of tidy whities, flames leaping from the crotch in front and back. The silhouette of a demon leaped from the fire, the painful end of a pitchfork nearly piercing its rump. In comic strip fashion, a quote bubble read simply, "Enough with the lube, I'm with Smythe." This wouldn't have been so funny, except the demons liked it so much they took to wearing them daily, and only them. Demons don't normally wear clothes, but they even began shouting the slogan. To this day, I don't know whose idea it was. I remember hearing the words, "That third time I was violated," but only vaguely, like a distant memory. It was such a traumatic experience that much of what was said left me cored out and hollow. In that moment, I contemplated something until the next day, when I woke up ready for more of the same. I believe hell was essentially created that way for torture. There's no recuperating. You can do anything to anyone in hell, and within 24 hours all is cured, at least physically. How else can a vulture eat your liver every day for all eternity? Ask Prometheus. He'll tell you. I finally made headway that day, 2 months after I arrived, with demons running and around in tighty-whities shouting, "Enough with the lube, I'm with Smythe!" Fester and Stewpot were at either side as I approached the second candidate, self-elected. Beer Crisp was his name, and he was a demon. He had strong support in the polls, according to the thermometer Stewpot had drawn on our living room wall. We each had one. The goblin loved using colored chalk to show the level of support we each had in the demon community. I had made up quite the distance, leaving me with 40% of the vote, assuming Stewpot's projections were correct. I didn't know the specifics of his data collection, but if the way we were gaining traction was any indication, it wasn't using well-thought-out speeches. I toured, gave the equivalent of stump speeches and the like, but if I strayed from short quips and jokes for too long, they quickly became distracted. The demons were only interested in violence, destruction, and chinchillas. I think because they liked the word. Plus drinking and jokes. I figured it out. 80% of any speech I gave had to relate to those 5 things, and I couldn't go over 20 minutes or I'd lose them completely. They'd just devolve into arguing and fighting because they liked doing it more than listening. It was like trying to get the support of a classroom's worth of eternally unsupervised third graders with horns. What would Satan do? I asked as we strolled up to Bear Crisp's throne room. Yes, he created a throne room. Oh, I haven't heard that one in a while. WWSD. He'd probably have gone in, command their obedience, and made an example of one to show he didn't play. Considering my strengths, I realized that wouldn't work for me. Clearly, Satan was strong to command their obedience in such a way. I was Theodore J. Smythe, ex-stunt double, and most recent immigrant to hell. As we approached, Bear Crisp held up a hand. Bejeweled rings glittered on his fingers. He burped so loudly it echoed in the large throne room. That's better. Disgusting. I kept my thoughts to myself. Sure, I'd belched from time to time, even while out with the guys, but this was a formal occasion. And this guy wanted to be mayor of hell? No way. But how can I stop him? Setting aside my personal opinion, I tried for time to think. Hello, Beer Crisp. I hear tell that you want to be mayor. I do. What of it? Well, crap. Too short. That didn't work. I shook my head. Nothing. May the best man win. Stewpot glared at me. The demon candidate leaned forward, squinting down at us. A necklace rattled, and I realized what it was. A collection of teeth, all canines and fangs. Beer Crisp was no different than the other demons. He wanted what they all wanted. He lusted for pleasure and violence, often simultaneously. But why do we need to fight each other when there is so much out there? Because it's fun, Stewpot answered for him. Bear Crisp agreed, saying, yes, the gob is right. But wouldn't you rather be raping and pillaging, destroying the hearts of mortal men and women? Bear Crisp seemed to be weighing the question, his head tilting left momentarily, then right. I do both. I show you. Snapping his fingers, a strange man was dragged into the room, naked. Before Bear Crisp said another word, he plunged into the victim, swinging his pelvis back and forth and grinning maniacally. The man's anguish cries echoed. The demon's fangs gave him an even more sinister look as he said, You see, I have both. The little humanity left within me should have screamed watching such horrendous treatment, but months within these walls had tempered me to such acts. Whatever compassion I had left would fit on the head of a needle, and I was fairly certain just what everyone still down here was too afraid of setting foot upland. More than likely, he deserved whatever torture he got. Besides, he'll be fine by tomorrow, I told myself silently. Evidently, I still needed some reassurance. The demon pulled out and plunged a horn into the stranger's back. A blood-curdling scream reverberated in the cavernous room. Then he let the man slide off and slump to the floor. Swaggering toward me with blood dripping from one horn and a phallic domination bobbing, I could only stare up at the demon when he was within inches. Putrid breath covered me as he said, "And you next." A red pointed claw dug into my chest. "You, man with briefcase." I looked pleadingly at Stewpot and Fester. Fester was tensed, ready to step in if needed. Stewpot cringed and looked ready to run. The demons watching from the door, Bear Crisp's guards, only stared. Clearly, there was no way a stump speech would turn the tides of candidate Bear Crisp. I turned back to him once more, considering trading some of the warm beer we'd acquired, but Bear Crisp had a can of Foster's in his hand. Where had that come from? I didn't know, but he clearly wasn't short on alcohol. He guzzled it. Trade wouldn't work this time. I ticked off option after option, considering what I might possess of value to someone like Bear Crisp. Then something popped into my mind. Not an idea, but an inkling. It had occurred to me the third time I'd been ravaged by one of these beasts. "What was your job before Satan left?" I inquired. Bear Crisp finished the beer, crushed it, and took a bite of the aluminum can. While chewing, he said, "Lead torturer. I up for commendation this year. Satan promised. Now nothing." Stewpot interjected in a whisper. "This year might not be too accurate. Measuring time isn't a demon's best skills." The demon said nothing. I nodded and told Bear Crisp, "So you want the respect you deserve?" "Course I do." "I can give it to you." "Or I take it." Fester grunted his agreement. "Fez, he doesn't need your help," I hissed. Fester frowned, looking ashamed. The truth to the most fundamental question became clear in that instant. Why was I here? The inkling I'd had of my own guilt was likely the key to my mayoral win, and my sanity throughout an eternity spent in this place. To govern, I would have to be truly a servant of the people. Turning my attention back to Bear Crisp, I asked, "And you would like to mete out the punishments?" "Punishments? Yes. Why we here?" I nodded, hefted the briefcase attached to my wrist, and decided my next move. "Fine. If you support me as mayor, I'll give you this. In it are the sins committed by every person in hell, their punishment decrees, and the data for all history. I think there might even be a printer in here, considering how the papers keep piling up with new editions." I tried to smile. Under the creature's cat-like gaze and putrid breath, even standing straight was difficult. "But what you do, briefcase man?" I wouldn't have the briefcase anymore. I wouldn't be the briefcase man. You would. "But what you do, briefcase man?" he repeated, emphasizing his point by digging his claw deeper into my chest. Grimacing, I bit my lip and stood up to him. However, this wasn't the most difficult part. Admitting my guilt was. I will be mayor. I will create paved streets, schools, and govern for the demons. "But what?" he began to repeat. I pushed his finger away and nodded. "I know what you're asking. I admit it. I deserve to be here. I raped women in the upland. I deserve my punishment, and each night you will administer it. Once I have provided for hell as mayor each day, you will instruct me." With the admission, I could no longer look into the creature's eyes. Its condemning gaze was too much. The treatment may be warranted for some and not others, but I certainly deserved it. "I will be a true servant of the people," I finished. "Dill, we start tonight. Come here, 10th bell." I nodded. Time was measured by bells here in hell, for there was no daylight to gauge from. 10 o'clock at night would give me long enough days to do what I needed. Days passed. Hell adopted a routine through guidance and some stern warnings. Thankfully, Bear Crisp sent his crew to enforce the peace, and the streets grew less dangerous. Within a month, humans walked the newly paved streets without fear, or at least without unwarranted fear, depending on each person's punishment decree. And each night, in reparations for my vicious acts during life, I spent with Bear Crisp. Sometimes he even left a tube of KY sitting on the nightstand when he left, but never before. The irony of it was not lost on me. must be part of my punishment decree. The end. Thank you for joining us for Story Glimpse Season 1. Again, this is best-selling author Weston Kincade. If you'd like to hear about more, please subscribe and click the bell. We also have another video that actually discusses Hell to the Chief specifically, and writing short stories in general. So if you'd like to hear more about that, please follow the link. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.